Hey everyone, today I wanted to cover a few more ideas for our writing workshop on academic writing, and just to kind of continue on with this theme. I know I've been hitting this kind of hard, but I really want you to internalize this throughout the semester, this idea of Burke's Parlor and developing an academic voice by envisioning your audience. And this is one of the things that's going to help you to become a better writer. I've asked students in the past, teaching writing for several years now, I've asked students generally what is the hardest thing to improve about your writings. And generally what I have found is that they are struggle with writer's blindness. And we'll talk about this in terms of soldier's mindset in just a moment. But essentially what writer's blindness is not being able to see your own weaknesses in your writing, to be able to see where you're not making the connections and where the argument is weak, and just being able to only see from your perspective. And so that's something that students say that they generally struggle with, right? The inability to accurately assess one's own writing, believing it to be better and clearer than it is. And I wanted to help with that, right? One strategy to this, to help alleviate this writer's blindness, is to read your paper out loud. And we're going to do this each week as I divide you into groups to do peer evaluations. I'm going to encourage you guys to actually read through, verbally read through your papers rather than just silently do it, because this helps us to not only share our ideas with others and others be able to hear them and then to respond, but it also helps ourselves to be able to hear our own voice and to hear to read our paper in another context, which helps us to be able to see our own weaknesses so that we can improve. Another thing that helps us to overcome writer's blindness, and everyone struggles with this, even I struggle with this. Sometimes I make an argument that I think is clearer than it actually is, and it takes me a little bit more time to kind of to look at it through a new set of eyes. And reading out loud helps me to do this. Peer editing also helps me to do this, to have someone else actually read through your paper. And sometimes this is really hard to do. Writing is a vulnerable act, and we don't necessarily want anyone to think we're foolish or we're off kind of out in the middle of the desert somewhere, kind of in some type of academic kind of desert, not really knowing where we're going or lost or something. So we're a little bit hesitant about sharing our ideas with others, but I want to caution against this. Right, we're all kind of struggling, we're all looking for ways to improve, and so don't be afraid to share your ideas with others, and so that you can focus on improving. That's really the biggest thing that I want you to get out of this class, is to improve where you're at. Wherever you are, I want to help you to become a better writer, right? It's not easy to overcome your own writing blindness. Others may help catch other things that you miss, and so that's something that I want you to really focus on this semester, right? It's really hard to catch some of the mistakes. I mean, a lot of the writing software out there helps us to catch spelling errors and some of the grammatical mistakes. But it's a little bit harder to catch whether we're going into enough depth, whether we're analyzing enough, whether we have too much plot summary and try to get rid of that, right? So sometimes it's a little bit harder to see. Another things that students say that they, some of the hardest things that they face with writing is, the first one is time, finding time to be able to do it. And this semester is really, the class is really intense, where it's just one paper after another paper after another paper. Another one is the knowledge of a subject, not feeling as though they know enough about it to write about it. Another one is they struggle with organization. They have a lot of ideas, and I'm going to give you a lot of complexity to very complex issues, to see things from multiple angles. And I did this a little bit with the poems and the short story that we had that we read this week, just to scratch the surface of the complexity of them. So trying to organize all those complex ideas sometimes becomes a little bit tricky. And then the fear of the blank page, not really having anything to write or feeling that you're not going to have anything to write. And so just kind of staring at that blank page. And then the other one is just boredom. They're not really passionate about the topic, or they're just not really passionate about writing itself. And so that is another obstacle that students generally tend to tell me that they face. And another one is distractions, right? Other things that are pulling at them, whether it's other homework or just other, social life or whatever. The things that are vying for their time, right? So these are some of the things that students generally tend to say that they struggle with in terms of improving their writing over the semester. And I'm going to help you to overcome each of these. Sometimes some of them take a little bit more time than others. But a lot of it's going to depend upon your ability to practice these efforts, right? If I was going to teach you how to throw free throws or shoot free throws, if I could tell you the theory behind it, I could tell you about the kinesiology, about the movement of the body and the motion and the bouncing of the ball, and I can tell you all about those. Well, I really can't tell you about those, but if I was able to tell you about all of those and teaching that, that would be one thing. But if you never went out and practiced, right, then your ability to improve is not going to be as great as if you're actually going out there and applying these principles. And so a lot of it's going to depend upon your ability to go out and apply the principles that I teach to help to improve writing, right? One thing that I want to help you with is, helping you with a mindset. I'm going to show you a TED Talk by Julie Galef, and she's going to talk about the differences between the soldier and the scout mindset. And I want you to think about what are the differences between them and where are you on most of the time, right? Some of the times we're probably going to be more soldier, sometimes we're going to be more scout, but most of the time, where would you say that you are?
I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you're a soldier in the heat of battle. Maybe you're a Roman foot soldier, or a medieval archer, or maybe you're a Zulu warrior. Regardless of your time and place, there are some things that are constant. Your adrenaline is elevated, and your actions are stemming from these deeply ingrained reflexes rooted in a need to protect yourself and your side, and to defeat the enemy. So now, I'd like you to imagine playing a very different role, that of the scout. So the scout's job is not to attack or defend. The scout's job is to understand. The scout is the one going out, mapping the terrain, identifying potential obstacles, and the scout may hope to learn that, say, there's a bridge in a convenient location across a river. But above all, the scout wants to know what's really there, as accurately as possible. And in a real, actual army, both the soldier and the scout are essential. But you can also think of each of these roles as a mindset, a metaphor for how all of us process information and ideas in our daily lives. And what I'm going to argue today is that having good judgment, making accurate predictions, making good decisions, is mostly about which mindset you're in. So, to illustrate these mindsets in action, I'm going to take you back to 19th century France, where this innocuous-looking piece of paper launched one of the biggest political scandals in history. It was discovered in 1894 by officers in the French General Staff, and it was torn up in a wastepaper basket, but when they pieced it back together, they discovered that someone in their ranks had been selling military secrets to Germany. So they launched a big investigation, and their suspicions quickly converged on this man, Albert Dreyfus. He had a sterling record, no past history of wrongdoing, no motive as far as they could tell, but Dreyfus was the only Jewish officer at that rank in the army. And unfortunately at this time, the French army was highly anti-Semitic. So they compared Dreyfus's handwriting to that on the memo and concluded that it was a match. Even though outside professional handwriting experts were much less confident in the similarity, but never mind that. They went and searched Dreyfus's apartment, looking for any signs of espionage. They went through his files, and they didn't find anything. And this just convinced them more that Dreyfus was not only guilty, but sneaky as well, because clearly he had hidden all of the evidence before they had managed to get to it. Next, they went and looked through his personal history for any incriminating details. They talked to his teachers. They found that he had studied foreign languages in school, which clearly showed a desire to conspire with foreign governments later in life. His teachers also said that Dreyfus had a good memory, known for having a good memory, which was highly suspicious, right? Because a spy has to remember a lot of things. So the case went to trial, and Dreyfus was found guilty. And afterwards, they took him out into this public square and ritualistically tore his insignia from his uniform and broke his sword in two. This was called the degradation of Dreyfus. and they sentenced him to life imprisonment on the aptly named Devil's Island, which is this barren rock off the coast of South America. So there he went, and there he spent his days alone, writing letters and letters to the French government, begging them to reopen his case so they could discover his innocence. But for the most part, France considered the matter closed. So one thing that's really interesting to me about the Dreyfus affair is this question of why the officers were so convinced that Dreyfus was guilty. I mean, you might even assume that they were setting him up, that they were intentionally framing him, but historians don't think that's what happened. As far as we can tell, the officers genuinely believed that the case against Dreyfus was strong, which, makes you wonder, what does it say about the human mind that we can find such paltry evidence to be compelling enough to convict a man? Well, this is a case of what scientists call motivated reasoning. It's this phenomenon in which our unconscious motivations, our desires and fears, shape the way we interpret information. So some information, some ideas feel like our allies, and we want them to win, we want to defend them. And other information or ideas are the enemy, and we want to shoot them down. So this is why I call motivated reasoning soldier mindset. And probably most of you have never persecuted a French Jewish officer for high treason, I assume, but maybe you've followed sports or politics. So you might have noticed that when the referee judges that your team committed a foul, for example, you're highly motivated to find reasons why he's wrong. But if he judges that the other team committed a foul, awesome, that's a good call. Let's not examine it too closely. Or maybe you've read an article or a study that examined some controversial policy, like capital punishment. And as researchers have demonstrated, if you support capital punishment and the study shows that it's not effective, then you're highly motivated to find all the reasons why the study was poorly designed. But if it shows that capital punishment works, awesome, it's a good study. And vice versa, if you don't support capital punishment, same thing. Our judgment is just strongly influenced, unconsciously, by which side we want to win. And this is ubiquitous. This shapes how we think about our health, our relationships, how we decide how to vote, what we consider fair or ethical. And what's most scary to me about motivated reasoning or soldier mindset is how unconscious it is. We can think we're being objective and fair-minded and still wind up ruining the life of an innocent man. However, fortunately for Dreyfus, his story is not over. This is Colonel Picquart. He was another high-ranking officer in the French army. And like most people, he assumed Dreyfus was guilty. Also, like most people in the army, he was at least casually anti-Semitic. But at a certain point, Picquart began to suspect, what if we're all wrong about Dreyfus? And what happened was that he had discovered evidence that the spying for Germany had continued even after Dreyfus was in prison. And he had also discovered that another officer in the army had handwriting that perfectly matched the memo, much closer than Dreyfus's handwriting. So he brought these discoveries to his superiors, but to his dismay, they either didn't care or came up with elaborate rationalizations to explain his findings, like, all you've really shown, Picquart, is that there's another spy who learned how to mimic Dreyfus's handwriting, and he picked up the torch of spying after Dreyfus left. But Dreyfus is still guilty. Eventually, Picquart managed to get Dreyfus exonerated, but it took him 10 years, and for part of that time, he himself was in prison for the crime of disloyalty to the army. So, a lot of people feel like Picquart can't really be the hero of this story because he was an anti-Semite, and that's bad, which I agree with. But personally, for me, the fact that Picquart was anti-Semitic actually makes his actions more admirable to me, because he had the same prejudices, the same reasons to be biased as his fellow officers, but his motivation to find the truth and uphold it just trumped all of that. So to me, Picquart is a poster child for what I call scout mindset. It's the drive not to make one idea win or another lose, but just to see what's really there as honestly and accurately as you can, even if it's not pretty or convenient or pleasant. And this mindset is what I'm personally passionate about, and what I've spent the last few years examining and trying to figure out what causes scout mindset. Why are some people, sometimes at least, able to cut through their own prejudices and biases and motivations and just try to see the facts and the evidence as objectively as they can? And the answer is emotional. So just as soldier mindset is rooted in emotions like defensiveness or tribalism, scout mindset is too. It's just rooted in different emotions. So for example, scouts are curious. They're more likely to say that they feel pleasure when they learn new information or an itch to solve a puzzle. They're more likely to feel intrigued when they encounter something that contradicts their expectations. Scouts also have different values. They're more likely to say that they think it's virtuous to test your own beliefs, and they're less likely to say that someone who changes his mind seems weak. And above all, scouts are grounded, which means that their self-worth as a person isn't tied to how right or wrong they are about any particular topic. So, they can believe that capital punishment works, and if studies come out showing that it doesn't, they can say, looks like I might be wrong. Doesn't mean I'm bad or stupid, So these traits, this cluster of traits, is what researchers have found, and I've also found anecdotally, predicts good judgment. And the key takeaway I want to leave you with about those traits is that they're primarily not about how smart you are or about how much you know. In fact, they don't correlate very much with IQ at all. They're about how you feel. So there's a quote that I keep coming back to by Saint-Exupéry. He's the author of The Little Prince. And he said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up your men to collect wood and give orders and distribute the work. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. In other words, I claim, if we want to really improve our judgment as individuals and as societies, what we need most is not more instruction in logic or rhetoric or probability or economics, even though those things are quite valuable. But what we most need to use those principles well is scout mindset. We need to change the way we feel. We need to learn how to feel proud instead of ashamed when we notice we might have been wrong about something. We need to learn how to feel intrigued instead of defensive when we encounter some information that contradicts our beliefs. So the question I want to leave you with is, what do you most yearn for? Do you yearn to defend your own beliefs? Or do you yearn to see the world as clearly as you possibly can? Thank you.
Okay, so I want to take a look at some of the applications to Julia Galef's argument about the scout and the soldier. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go with that, right? But there's some key points I want us to think about, right? The scout, it's not about winning or being right? It's about understanding others. It's about being curious about new ideas and open for change, and about growth and intrigue and desire for knowledge. And so this has a couple of different applications. I want you to think about which would make a better writer and why, right? So I think the knee-jerk reaction is to think about writing as you just want to get your ideas out there and to force others to see your point of view and to shut them down. But I think a better way to approach it is to think about writing as just a search for understanding, and a way to throw a suggestion or a thought out there for people to be able to consider. Another application to this is thinking about an A mentality, right? The A mentality of the scout, and versus the non-A mentality approach to your grades. And I've noticed that people that have, whether an A mentality, and again, it's not necessarily about grades, it's just about being successful within the classroom, versus those that tend to struggle. They have certain attributes. Those that tend to be more successful in education generally understand that assignments are not about intellect, they're more about hard work and determination, right? It's about our efforts, because really when it gets down to it, your assignments are mainly being graded on your effort that we put into it. And all we're going to know, myself or the TAs are going to know, is the end result, right? The product that you're submitting at the end. We'll take a look at this and we'll judge how much effort we think went into it. And we're not perfect at, judging that. Sometimes some people will put more effort into it and not get necessarily the higher grade, and some people will put less and get a higher grade than others. And so it's an imperfect assessment about that hard work, but really that's what I'm looking for, right? How much hard work, how much effort, how much thought process went into it, right? Whereas the non-A mentality, or the less successful student, generally overestimates his or her abilities and underestimates the time needed to do a good job. And so they tend to think, oh, I'm just a good writer, or I've got this. And they tend to say, well, I can just do this in an hour or 30 minutes, or whatever the case may be. And they underestimate the time needed to do a really good job. And so they think what they're able to do, right? The A mentality, or the successful mentality, they see education as about acquiring new experiences, whereas the others see education as mainly the ordeal, right? Something that has to be endured, just trials that they're thrown at them until they are graduated. And this perspective changes the way that people see assignments, right? People that have more of a successful mindset, they see assignments as an opportunity to grow, where others see assignments as a trial, distraction, something that takes them away from other things that they would prefer to do, right? They see work as a different kind of mindset of starting early and returning too often to improve, because mainly it's about their growth, that kind of growth mindset that they're working towards. Whereas those that struggle with it, because they see it as a trial or distraction, they don't really want to do it, so they start late and they rush to complete it, right? Because they have a different mindset, a different focus. Those that are successful generally tend to see rules of assignment as doctrine, like they're trying to really follow, to meet those rules, because they see them as the standards for completion. Whereas those that struggle tend to see rules of the assignment as merely suggestions. I'm going to do it my way. I'm just going to, do a quick job and hurry up, and then hope that I'm going to get a better grade than I perhaps should. Those that have more of a successful mindset see poor grades as an opportunity to learn to strengthen their weaknesses. Whereas those that struggle, right, with this, they see poor grades as excuses and ways to blame. And so they generally have this idea that poor grades are an indication of their self-esteem or their self-worth. And so they become very defensive and they start blaming others as a result of that, right? Whereas, the other mindset, right, the more successful mindset sees grades as something that's entirely in their hands, or mainly in their hands. Whereas others that struggle with it, they tend to see grades as something that's beyond their control. Like they don't know what's going to happen. It completely seems random to them. So they feel as though there's nothing that they can do about it, right? And then those that are more successful see classes that are educational opportunities, and boredom is self-imposed. Whereas those that tend to struggle with education see classes should be entertaining to escape from the boredom of college, right? So a different type of mindsets, right? A different way that they see professors, right? The professor is an advocate versus an adversary. And so it's a different type of mindset. And so thinking about this mindset, I know it doesn't seem like it immediately applies to writing, but if you're struggling with seeing education as more of the soldier mindset, one quick way to help change your writing is to try to change your mindset about what work really is, right? And in order to do that, we need to rethink about why we're here in terms of education. I had you rethink this a little bit in Monday's class about it shouldn't necessarily be about getting a job, because really more and more people are hiring people without a college degree. That's not really what they're looking for anyway. And so if you're going to be here, what should you get out of it? Rather than a degree, maybe we should get out of it this kind of idea of growth and development to become a better person, right? So maybe that's a different perspective. And if you approach it with that perspective, you approach assignments with that different mindset, you're going to be more successful, and your writing is going to significantly improve, because you're going to actually look forward to it more, right? If you're looking forward to something, you generally do better than if you're dreading it, right? So that's another kind of thing to think about, right? I like this quote by Kierkegaard. He said, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." And that's really what education should be, right? And not just a problem to be solved to get through the ordeal to graduate, but it should be about the experiences and learning opportunities that we grow along, we gain along the way. And then Hannah Montana, a great philosopher of the 21st century, she says, life is what you make it, right? So the idea here is let's, focus on different elements to make our writing, to make our educational experience better. All right, let's turn to the journal do's and don'ts. And so thinking of assignments and thinking of commandments, thou shalt not. So let me give you some thou shalt nots here to consider that I want you to do or not do, right? The first one is I want you to tell the reader why your topic is important and what he or she will learn in your opening statement, right? And so I want you to think about the reader, think about the audience. This gets back to Burke's Parlor, which I've been emphasizing this semester. So think about yourself as a reader. If you're reading something, you want to know what you're reading, why it's important, and what you're going to learn right from the very beginning. Otherwise, you don't want to waste your time, right? And so you have to extend the same courtesy to your readers, right? As you're thinking about them, what do they want? They're going to have the same expectations that you do. They want to know what's your topic going to be about and what we're going to learn from this, right? Why it's important. And so something to consider, right? And so, again, thinking about yourself as a reader, right? Thinking about what you want to get out of it. That's what your reader wants to get out of it, right? When you read an article, you immediately want to know what the author will argue and why it's important, so extend the same courtesy to your reader. Don't start the paper with a cliffhanger and wait until the end for a surprise kind of reveal, like this is some type of murder mystery or something. At the end, you kind of reveal your argument. No, tell the reader what your argument is at the very beginning. Think about your argument as the trailer to a film, right? You're kind of inviting them to see the film or to read the rest of the paper. Don't necessarily make it like a surprise, because most of the time they're not going to finish reading it, right? So they want to know. Number 2, you want to avoid overgeneralizations. You don't want to say things like, since the beginning of time, art has been debated, right? Your paper is not going to be able to cover. It's mainly going to be 2 pages, so they're not going to be able to cover since the beginning of time, right? You're not going to be able to cover since Adam all the way into current contemporary artists like Richard Serra or something. Every artist under that would be several volumes of books that would take. And so mainly you want to be more focused. And so if you're taking a look at like Pablo Picasso, focus on Pablo Picasso defines art as, right? Make it much more specific and avoid overgeneralizations. Or don't say things like, most people agree that Jig had the abortion, right? That makes it seem like your argument has more weight because you're saying, well, this is a democracy here and people all agree with me, right? That doesn't necessarily mean anything. If you're going to point to some specific person, say art critic so-and-so suggests that Jig has the abortion, and I agree with this because, right? That's much more specific. It's much more focused than just these random, ambiguous, kind of generalizations of people out there, these mythical people that you don't really know who they are. The reader will read that and be like, yeah, who are these most people? I don't know who they are. You're not referring to them, so it doesn't really have any meaning. Also remember transitions, right? Transitions, right? Make sure all your points build on each other. Make sure you're leading the reader from one point to another. Explain how this point relates to the last point, and it's now leading to the next point. And so you want to make sure that you're guiding the reader through as you're kind of the tour guide of your ideas. You want to lead the person from one point to another. And so think about you being a tour guide in a museum, and you're leading them from room to room to room. Right? Avoid passive voice. Make sure the subject is doing the action in the sentence. And so passive voice, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the semester, but passive voice, such as the ball was hit by the boy, that's passive voice. Generally, passive voice tends to be a little bit weaker, like you're hiding something. Instead of saying the ball was hit by the boy, say the boy hit the ball, right? The person, that's the subject, the boy, is doing the action, hitting the ball, right? Rather than taking the ball was hit by the boy, that's the direct object is doing the action, right? That makes it passive voice, and it weakens your argument, so avoid that as much as possible. Avoid qualifiers. Don't say things like many or a lot of or lots or several or plenty. Again, much like the idea of most people agree that Jig had the abortion above, that just tends to weaken your argument because it seems like you're trying to have more authority than you actually do, and the reader's going to see right through that. Right? So don't say things like many people agree or most people think or a lot of people, a lot of scholars suggest, right? If you're going to refer to scholars, refer to specific ones. That makes your argument much more specific. All right, here's number 6. Make statements, no questions, ever, 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 right? Seriously, never. So don't say things like, what is art? Who gets to decide? Why is it important? Why is this important, right? And just kind of throw that out there like the reader's supposed to answer that, right? If you're reading something, an article, do you want the writer to just pose a bunch of questions and then leave it for you to decide? You're going to the article, you're reading the article to get information out of it. You have to, again, extend the same courtesy to the reader that you demand as a reader, right? And so you have to think about that as the writer, thinking about your audience. Your audience doesn't want the reader to or the writer to pose questions to them. They want you to answer the questions for them, and so that's what you want to do. If you ask questions in your paper, it weakens your paper and it weakens your argument, and you don't want to do that, right? Say instead, right, of what is art, say art is such and such because such and such, right? So it's a much more assertive, much stronger way to do it. You have a stronger voice, and that's what I want to teach you guys is how to have a stronger voice. Number 7 is avoid first person. Avoid the use of I within the context of your paper. Generally, that's because it weakens your paper when you say something like, I think that Jig had the abortion, or I feel that she didn't have the abortion, or I think that a good leader is, right? Instead of saying, I think that a good leader is, say, a good leader is, right? Or Jig had the abortion because, or Jig didn't have the abortion because, right? And so the use of I think that generally weakens your paper. It makes it seem like you're not really certain. You know that you kind of don't want to step on anyone's toes, right? But when you say something like Jig didn't have the abortion because, it makes it much more assertive. You sound confident. You sound stronger. You sound more assertive. And that's what we really want out of when we're reading something. We want someone to be assertive. We want someone to be strong. We want someone to be confident. And that's what I want to teach you guys how to be, is confident writers with a very strong voice. Number 8, keep it simple. Please keep it simple. Don't overuse the thesaurus or make your paper overly complex or amplify your paper with too many words, trying to get at that page number, right? Generally, the simpler that you say something, the clearer, more focused, and better your ideas will be. And so avoid something like this. Seminal stages of antiquity have derived an astute delineation of art exemplification. If you take a look at this, it's overly wordy and using complex words, generally trying to sound smarter than you need to, right? Generally, what I would ask you to do is to use the language that you would normally use when you're talking with someone. Just make it slightly more formal, right? And so don't use the thesaurus trying to trick your audience into thinking that you're smart, because again, they're going to see through that, right? Or don't do this one where you're trying to puff it up with too many words. To derive the best achievable definition that could possibly be given to reach a sound understanding about what art is, one must examine the greatest thinkers who have ever walked the face of this good earth, right? So there's a lot of words in there, and it's not really saying a lot, right? It's just saying that art is this, right? That's all it is, that's saying. And so try to avoid that, right? The golden rule of writing is this: have the reader understand your ideas with as few as words as possible, right? When you're reading something, you want to get to the writer to get to the point as fast as possible so that you can understand them. You want to understand the ideas, and you want to get there as soon as you can, right? And again, you have to extend that same courtesy to the reader. I'm having you think about the reader, because that's going to be key to good writing. When you're writing for your boss in the future, when you're writing to others, if some of you might want to take up writing or to be in a museum, right? When you're writing to others, you have to think about your audience, because your audience is going to be, you're writing to someone, and they're going to they're going to have high demands for your writing. And so we have to think about that early on, and the more we can think about this, the sooner that we can think about this, the stronger your writing will be, and the better the writer you'll become.